All right, today we're going to discuss our outdoor wood boiler and some of the pros and cons in case you're considering a system like this. So what we have here is a Woodmaster 4400. So with this system, the 4400 gives you the size of the wood that it'll take. So that stands for 44-inch long material that you can put in here. So if we open this up, you can see it has a large opening for the firebox. I believe this is about 2 foot by 2 foot and extends 44 inches deep. So you can put longer wood in here. So with an outdoor boiler, it constantly has, this is a traditional style boiler, the fire is constantly burning. So around the firebox is a jacket of water that's heated, and on the side it has a digital temperature control, and you can set how hot the water gets. So what that does, the fire constantly heats the water, and that hot water is constantly pumped to the house. So that allows you to heat your house and your hot water and any other buildings that you have. So that's kind of the main purpose of the boiler, is for your heat. So we're going to go through some of the cons. So your initial con and your biggest one, if you talk to anybody that has a boiler or really kind of dogs on boilers, is going to be the amount of wood that you use. Compared to a freestanding wood stove, especially some of the higher efficiency stoves that you can get nowadays, the amount of wood that you use is quite substantial. I would estimate I probably burn between, 3 to 5 times more wood with this system than if I had a freestanding stove just in the house. So that's going to be your biggest con. So this year I had prepared 18 full cords of wood. With the mild winter that we had this year, I don't anticipate using all that wood, but I would estimate 12 to 15 cords of that I'm probably still going to burn. We'll see how the season ends out, but that's a lot of wood for most people. That's a really substantial amount of wood. So that's the biggest con. Second on the list, the initial cost. Some of your higher efficiency freestanding stoves that you can get nowadays, are maybe between $2,000 and $5,000. This unit, as I saw it just the other day, for just the unit, is running about $10,000 brand new. So that doesn't include any of the piping. You need to put the pipe under the ground. So you're talking about excavation work, like a mini X, your HVAC guys to get it set up into the house. If you need a separate person that does the plumbing work to set up any of the plumbing, especially if you're going to hook it up to your hot water. So there isn't another cost there besides the cost for the boiler. So you could be looking at this unit right now. If I were to buy this with all the proper piping, you could be looking at between $10,000 to $15,000, depending on how much of that work that you can do yourself. So the initial cost is pretty high. Next on the list, as I discussed with installation, since you have to run those pipes to the house, you have to consider things like, where's your well? Where's your septic? Is there phone lines or electrical work in the way? Since you have to run these water lines under the ground, because it has to run the water all the time, you have to consider what obstacles might be in the way. So that would dictate where you're able to put it and anything that might be in the way that you have to work around. Next on the list, you're going to be looking at potentially any zoning issues. Around here, for me, we're out into the county a little bit. It's not a problem. Depending if you get closer to the city, there's requirements for how high the chimney has to be to get the smoke, above the rest of the building. So that's something to consider. The other thing, unlike a freestanding stove, especially if it's going to be really cold, like we had some weather a couple weeks ago, it was about 10 below zero. You stack up all your wood inside the house or inside maybe your entryway or something like that in your garage. You kind of hunker down for the night and you can just stay inside. So with this, obviously it's outside. You're going to have to come outside no matter what temperature it is. You're going to have to come outside and feed the fire. So if it's 20 below zero, you're putting your boots on and putting your jacket on, and you're getting your butt out and putting wood in the stove. So to some, that might not sound like that big of a deal. But if you're used to staying inside in the coldest weather and you really don't feel like going outside, that can kind of be a little bit of a con. All right, now we're going to discuss some of the pros on having a system like this and why it would let us to have this installed. So the biggest thing is we have an old school farmhouse. It's been remodeled. So it's 2,200 square feet with a huge lofted living room. We also heat our garage that's basically turned into a workspace, which is almost 900 square feet. So a system like this allows, so this is one system that can heat all of that space, plus it still has another output on the back where you can hook up a separate pump to heat a separate building. So you have one unit that can heat either a very large structure or multiple structures all from one unit. So that initial cost where I talked about this is $10,000. You can kind of figure out if you had multiple buildings and multiple stoves to buy, that maybe that kind of offsets some of the cost. So that's one of the biggest pros, is that you can heat a large area or in multiple buildings. The second one, you hear people talk about burning green wood or unseasoned wood. Although it's not recommended, you definitely can do that. So if you have green wood, you got it late in the season, you just didn't get it split. Maybe you found a sawmill that has slabs, so it's typically not wood that you would normally burn inside. Stuff like that, this thing will just eat that up all day long. It doesn't burn as efficiently, obviously, because green wood, the moisture in there doesn't burn, so you're using the fire to season it as it's in the stove. It'll still do it. And other scrap wood. So maybe there's a cabinet place near you or someplace else where you're getting, buckets full of stuff. You can just literally take that bucket and just throw buckets full of scrap wood, all sorts of stuff like that, to make it easier. Since the opening is so big, you can burn up all that scrap wood where it's not as reasonable to do that inside. The next nicest thing, if you were to see around me, there is a lot of the mess. We had burnt up a lot of standing dead oak. So kind of that little punk and some of the flake and bark that's on the outside, all that mess stays outside. Instead of splitting up the wood and bringing it inside, you're inevitably going to have some of that stuff tracked inside as you're hauling it in, whether you're using one of those little cradles or whatever it is. You're tracking that stuff through the house. So all the mess stays outside instead of bringing any of that stuff inside. With a system like this, you're obviously, with the one that we have, like I said, it does fit longer wood. You can stack that firebox. You are going to, depending on the size of the house that you have or the structures that you're going to burn, you're going to get a boiler sized properly for the area that you're going to heat. So if you have a smaller house, obviously you can get a smaller boiler. So with that said, you're going to get it sized so where you can stoke that thing up before you go to bed, and you're never going to have to wake up in the middle of the night to stoke the fire. I know the guy wakes up in the coldest of the winter days, like I talked about, can get negative 20 here. He's up twice a night to throw wood in the stove. And at any other time during the winter, he's up at least once a night. To me, that's just ridiculous. There's no need to have to get up in the middle of the night. So that's another big pro, that you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night to worry about feeding the fire. Another big thing to me is the fire risk mitigation. So if you were to see the chimney here, it's only about 3 feet high. It barely sticks out of it does stick out of the roof a little bit. And we do have a metal roof on this structure, that you're not worried about your chimney getting plugged up or, having a chimney fire, burning your house down. If this shed were to burn down, it's far enough away from the house where that's not really a risk that we're going to lose the house. So that can be a pro, depending, if that's something that you're kind of adverse to, is worrying about the chimney fire. All right, some of the other things to consider are the wood cost and availability. On one of my favorite podcasts, the Survival Podcast, recently had an episode where the guest was talking about the cost to him locally. I think he's in Vermont, on how much wood sells for. And he was saying it was $400 per cord. And that was split wood that was delivered. And you look at me, and I just told you that I have 18 cord of wood. And you run them numbers, and there's just no way that pencils out to be cost effective. Well, every year when I call local loggers, because logging's a big industry around here, I pay somewhere between $75 and $100 per cord of wood delivered to the house. So you kind of got to run the numbers. And why I considered and did install this boiler, when we first bought this house, we neglected to ask and do our research on how much propane they used. When we first bought this house the year before, it was pretty cold that year. They used over 2,000 gallons of propane the year before we bought this house. So propane in our area it can be as low as less than $1, but maybe 88 cents. I think is the cheapest I've seen it. And one year it was as high as $5 per gallon. So at 2,000 gallons per year, I think on average, when I had bought propane, it was running about $2 per gallon. So you figure if my cost is $4,000 per year in propane, but I bought 18 cord of wood at $100 per cord, so I have $1,800 in the wood that I bought, plus my time and labor to split it and some equipment cost. To me, it still pencils out that it makes sense. But that was the third year that we had bought this place is when propane went up to $5 per gallon, and then it was just money in the bank after that because we quite literally wouldn't be able to afford to heat the house the year that the propane went up. So in your area, you're gonna have to figure out, can you get wood delivered, from a logger or someplace like that at a reasonable price, and do you have the equipment and the time and effort that you can put in to cut your own wood. That was one of the other things that I forgot in the pros. The nice thing with this, since the box is so big, unlike your freestanding wood stove in your house, you are able to cut the wood longer. So the wood splitter I have, we can cut 24-inch pieces instead of typical for most wood is 16 inches. We cut at 24, so it makes less cuts per 8-foot piece, and then that's less split. So whether you're using a splitter or doing it by hand, that's less number of pieces you got to split. So that does save you a little bit of time when you go to split the wood and stack the wood later. So those are some things to consider if you're looking at a boiler. To me, this is our 12th year heating with this boiler. We've had very little problems with it. We had one problem with the temperature sensor in it, but otherwise it's been pretty much maintenance free. You fill it up full of water. There's a little dummy light on the side. We have a hookup inside the house to fill it up with water. You come out, you clean the ashes out, you throw the wood in there, and it's really been worth it for us. In the 12 years that we've had, it's paid for itself plenty of times. So those are some things to consider in case you're looking for an outdoor wood boiler.